Hello, I'm Scott Graham, editor of the Recorder newspaper. I'm here today to interview Adil Haq, who's an attorney at Heller Ehrman, and Fiza Quraishi, who's with the National Center for Youth Law, and they're here today to tell us about some public interest work they're doing.
Yeah, basically the San Francisco Housing Authority a couple of years ago sort of instituted a policy targeting generally, so I think 95% of the targets were young black men who were residents of public housing in the city. And they sort of brought these injunction orders against them. And we had one client who was basically enjoined from being anywhere near any public housing unit in the city. So this is his whole life that it affected. His grandmother lived in one public housing unit, his sister in another, and it just seemed like an incredibly broad and unnecessary action on their part. And what makes it worse is that most of these, and it was mostly men, young men between 18 and 22 to whom this was done, most of these men were unrepresented. One of these cases made its way to our law firm through VLSP, which is a voluntary legal services provider, and they thought it would be something worth our while, and in fact it was. And we took on this case, and basically we were the first sort of group of attorneys to represent one of these kids in one of these actions. And we served discovery requests, and we moved forward with the case, and they eventually had the case dismissed because they didn't want to pursue it. And I think that speaks to the power of doing things in the way that law firms can, but it also speaks to the powerlessness of a lot of these kids to whom this was happening. The gang injunction case obviously is in the sort of more direct services, smaller scope end of things, but we're also representing a number of clients who are detained at Guantanamo. And the firm has been involved with their case for several years now. Obviously with recent Supreme Court decisions, those cases have now sort of become, for lack of a better word, hot. And we're hoping to pursue habeas actions on behalf of our clients and get them released. And that's intellectually, that's a really exciting thing to be a part of. But from my perspective, what's happening at Guantanamo is simply the most important legal issue of our times living in this country. And to play some role in that is for me personally fulfilling and really exciting.
So one client that I'm working with is a 17-year-old, and I started working with him about a year ago. And I started working with him actually, he was sitting in detention, and he had been there for 4 months in juvenile hall. He had a history of being 5150, they call it, so he was hospitalized because he was a danger to himself or others at least 4 times within a span of a year and a half. His mother was sort of at her wit's end. He was hearing voices, and he had lashed out at her. He had heard voices, thought they were trying to poison him. So she called the police. They took him to the hospital. And then once he was stabilized at the hospital, his mother said, I can't have him at home. I have other children in the house. It's not safe. I petitioned for him to be authorized to get mental health services. So in California, there's a separate application process you need to go through to get mental health services through special education, and he was approved for that, but they had limitations. They weren't 24/7. When he'd have outbursts at night, there was no one his mother could call, so he was hospitalized again. I mean, there were periods of him doing well, and then there were periods of him doing poorly, and then back in April he ran away, and then he was picked up in another county and had picked up another delinquency case as well when the police tried to, bring him home, and he reacted in a way, it was his mental illness that was actually prompting his reaction, but the police didn't know that, and so he was arrested. we worked to get that. I worked to get that dismissed, so his delinquency case was dismissed. So I worked very closely with the mother to outline exactly what services they had received to date and what had worked, what hadn't worked, got her to sort of articulate the needs of the child and the family. And we basically came up with the list and petitioned the school district and the Department of Mental Health. And finally, after months of fighting, we got him wraparound services, which are intensive, strengths-based, in-the-home services, community-based services. And he's been at home. He's been doing well for the last 3 months. So, it's really about empowering the child and empowering the family and listening to what they're articulating as their needs, and then trying to create a mental health plan around that, and not the service providers pushing an agenda of services onto the family.
I guess I can feel that. I think to the extent that we can, we avoid talking about the law at home. But that said, Fiza's work especially is very interesting, and she's very passionate about it. So that is definitely something that we talk a lot about, and I'm always interested to hear what's going on with her cases. So.
Yeah, and I think now with Adil's work on both the Guantanamo cases, but also the work that you're doing on behalf of blind clients, that sort of overlaps with work I'm doing or interest areas that I have. So, but we try to keep our work at work. So.
Yeah, I think that's key.
I think the key is to really do as many clinics as possible and work at public interest places, at least for one summer if you can, or if you can do even research with an organization. I think a lot of it is I think it's as important to find out what you don't like or what you don't want to do as it is, to figure out exactly the area that you do want to work in.